The fever had taken hold of her 3 nights ago, and now Amelia Zimmerman lay trembling beneath every blanket Russell Quade owned, her skin burning hot enough to make him fear she would combust from the inside out. He pressed his calloused hand against her forehead for the 100th time that morning, feeling the heat radiate from her flesh like a cookstove left burning too long, and knew with absolute certainty that if he did not get proper medicine soon, this woman who had stumbled into his life just 2 weeks prior would die in his crude mountain cabin. Russell stood from where he had been kneeling beside the narrow bed, his massive frame unfolding to its full height of 6 feet and 3 inches, muscles tensing beneath his worn buckskin shirt as he made a decision that could very well mean the difference between life and death. His long, dark hair, which hung past his shoulders and was tied back with a leather cord, swayed as he moved to the window and stared out at the vast Wyoming wilderness that stretched endlessly in all directions. The nearest town was Columbus, and it would take 3 days of hard riding to reach it from his isolated homestead in the Absaroka Mountains. 3 days there, 3 days back. Could she survive 6 days in her current condition? He turned back to look at Amelia, whose blonde hair lay plastered to her pale face with sweat, her lips moving soundlessly as delirium began to take hold. She was only 20 years old, a full 8 years younger than his own 28, and had arrived at his door after her wagon train had been attacked by bandits. She had been the only survivor, stumbling through the mountain passes for days before collapsing at his threshold, exhausted but otherwise unharmed at the time. Russell had taken her in without question, as any decent man would have done in the year of our Lord, 1877. He had given her his bed while he slept on the floor, shared his provisions, and told her she could stay as long as she needed while she figured out where to go next. The wagon train had been heading to Oregon, carrying families seeking new lives in the verdant valleys of the Pacific Northwest, but Amelia had no family waiting for her there. She had been traveling alone, fleeing from a marriage her father had arranged back in Missouri to a man 3 times her age. During those 2 weeks together in the cabin, something had shifted between them. Russell had lived alone in these mountains for 5 years, trapping beaver and hunting game, preferring solitude to the complications of civilization. But Amelia's presence had awakened something in him he thought had died along with his parents during the cholera outbreak of 1869. She laughed at his clumsy jokes, listened intently to his stories about surviving in the wilderness, and looked at him not with fear at his size and rough appearance, but with genuine warmth that made his chest tighten in unfamiliar ways. 3 nights ago, she had complained of a headache and feeling cold despite the summer warmth. By morning, the fever had set in with a vengeance. Russell had tried everything he knew, cool compresses, willow bark tea, even the herbs the Crow medicine man had taught him about years ago. Nothing worked. The fever continued to climb, and now she barely recognized him when her eyes fluttered open. He could not let her die. Not now. Not when he had just begun to understand what it meant to want someone to stay. Russell moved with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies for the journey. He packed dried meat, hardtack, his canteen, ammunition for his Henry rifle, and his skinning knife. He made sure the cabin's fire was safely banked, then prepared his horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Thunder that had carried him through countless miles of rough terrain. Before leaving, he returned to Amelia's side and gently lifted her head to coax a few drops of water between her cracked lips. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky, now clouded with fever. "Amelia," he said softly, his deep voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke aloud when alone, and even with her company these past weeks, he was not a man of many words. I have to leave for a while. Have to get you medicine from Columbus. I will be back as fast as I can. You hear me? You have to hold on." Her lips moved and he leaned closer to catch the whispered words. "Cold, so cold." He added another blanket to the pile covering her, though he knew the chill she felt was the fever playing tricks on her mind. "I will fix this. I promise you, Amelia. Just do not give up." She did not respond, having already slipped back into unconsciousness. Russell stood, jaw clenched with determination, and strode out of the cabin. He mounted Thunder and kicked the horse into motion, heading down the mountain trail at a pace that would be punishing for both of them, but necessary. The first day of riding was brutal. Russell pushed Thunder hard but not recklessly, knowing that a lame horse would doom them both. The mountain trails were treacherous, narrow paths that wound between towering pines and sheer cliff faces. More than once, loose rocks skittered out from under Thunder's hooves, sending small avalanches of stone tumbling into the valleys below. Russell kept the horse steady with firm hands and encouraging words, his mind constantly returning to the image of Amelia lying helpless and burning with fever. As he rode, he found himself remembering their conversations over evening meals. She had told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father who had slowly drowned his grief in whiskey until he became a stranger she no longer recognized. The arranged marriage had been his attempt to secure her future before the drink killed him. But Amelia had refused to sacrifice her life to a loveless union with a cruel man who saw her as property rather than a person. She had asked Russell about his life too, and he had found himself sharing stories he had never told another soul. About growing up in Ohio, learning to hunt and trap from his father, about the cholera that had swept through their town and taken both his parents within days of each other. About his decision to head west, to lose himself in the wilderness where death and loss could not find him again. Except death had found him anyway, he thought grimly as Thunder navigated a particularly steep descent. It was trying to take Amelia from him now, and he would be damned if he let it succeed. That night, Russell made camp in a small clearing beside a rushing stream. He did not build a fire, unwilling to waste even the minutes it would take to gather wood and strike a spark. Instead, he chewed on jerky and hardtack, watered Thunder, and allowed himself only 4 hours of rest before mounting up again in the pre-dawn darkness. The second day brought him down out of the mountains and onto the high plains that stretched across Wyoming territory. Here the riding was easier, and Russell urged Thunder into a steady lope that ate up the miles. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, and he had to ration his water carefully, knowing there would be no reliable streams until he reached the Yellowstone River Valley where Columbus lay. His body ached from the constant riding. His thighs burned, his back was stiff, and his hands were raw from gripping the reins. But Russell had endured worse during his years in the mountains. He had survived blizzards that should have killed him, gone days without food during lean winters, fought off a mountain lion with nothing but his knife. Physical pain was something he could ignore. The thought of failing Amelia was what drove him forward relentlessly. On the evening of the second day, he finally allowed himself to sleep for a full 6 hours, knowing that he would reach Columbus by midday tomorrow if he maintained his current pace. He dreamed fitfully of Amelia, of her laugh when he had accidentally knocked over a water bucket while trying to demonstrate how he once had to chase a beaver through his own cabin. Of the way she had looked at him 2 days before she fell ill, when he had returned from checking his trap lines to find her humming while she mended one of his shirts, and she had smiled at him with such genuine happiness that it had stopped him in his tracks. That was when he had known. That was when he had realized that this woman, who had appeared in his life like an answered prayer he had never thought to utter, meant more to him than the solitude he had cherished for 5 years. He wanted her to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because he could not imagine his life without her in it anymore. But he had said nothing, had not known how to put such feelings into words. Mountain men did not speak of love and longing. They spoke of practical things, of survival and weather and the behavior of animals. Now he wished desperately that he had told her, that she knew how much she had come to mean to him in such a short time. He would tell her when he got back, if he got back in time. When he got back in time, he corrected himself fiercely. Failure was not an option he would entertain. Russell woke before dawn on the third day and rode out immediately, pushing thunder harder now that the end was in sight. The Yellowstone River Valley opened up before him around mid-morning, a wide expanse of grassland dotted with cottonwood trees and sage brush. Columbus sat on the south bank of the river, a small but growing town that served as a supply point for ranchers, trappers, and the occasional prospector hoping to strike gold in the surrounding mountains. He reached the outskirts of town shortly after noon, Thunder's flanks dark with sweat, and his own body swaying with exhaustion in the saddle. The main street was busy with wagons and pedestrians going about their daily business. Horses were tied at hitching posts outside the saloon, the general store, and the hotel. Russell dismounted in front of the doctor's office, a small building with a painted shingle that read Dr. Howard Mitchell, physician and surgeon. Russell's legs nearly buckled when his feet hit the ground, stiff from 3 days of almost constant riding, but he forced himself forward and pushed through the door with enough force to make it bang against the inside wall. A middle-aged man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from where he was sitting at a desk, reviewing what appeared to be medical texts. He took in Russell's appearance, the trail dust, the desperate expression, the barely controlled panic in his eyes, and immediately stood. "What is the emergency?" Dr. Mitchell asked, already reaching for his medical bag. "Woman," Russell said, his voice hoarse. 3 days' ride north in the Absaroka Range. High fever started 4 days ago. Tried willow bark, cool compresses, nothing works. She is burning up and she will die if I do not get her proper medicine." Dr. Mitchell frowned, his expression grave. "Describe her other symptoms, any rash, cough, pain in specific areas." Russell forced his exhausted mind to focus, to remember the details he had observed. No rash. Some coughing, but not constant. She complains of her head hurting when she is conscious. Mostly she is delirious now, does not know where she is or who I am. How old is she? Was she injured recently? Any wounds that might have become infected? 20 years old. She arrived at my cabin 2 weeks ago, had been wandering after her wagon train was attacked. She was exhausted and scared but not injured. Was fine until 4 days ago. The doctor pulled out a bottle filled with clear liquid and another containing pills. "This is laudanum for the pain and to help her rest. These are quinine tablets. If it is what I suspect, a severe infection possibly progressing toward brain fever, the quinine might help. But I will be honest with you, Mr. Quade, Russell Quade. Mr. Quade, 3 days' ride back to your cabin means 6 days total without proper medical care. If her condition is as severe as you describe, those odds are not good." Russell felt something cold settle in his stomach, but he refused to accept defeat. "What else can I do?" "There must be something." Dr. Mitchell studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "I will come with you. My horse is fresh. We can ride in shifts, switch off to maintain a faster pace. I can bring proper medical supplies and treat her immediately when we arrive." Relief flooded through Russell so intensely he had to grip the edge of the doctor's desk to steady himself. "You would do that." "I took an oath to help those in need, Mr. Quade. Give me 20 minutes to pack my supplies and inform my wife where I am going. Take your horse to the livery across the street and get him tended to. Tell them to prepare 2 of their fastest horses with supplies for a hard journey. I will meet you there." Russell nodded and turned to leave, but Dr. Mitchell called after him, "Mr. Quade, get yourself some food and water. You look like you are about to collapse. You will be no good to her if you fall off your horse before we get there." Russell wanted to argue that every minute counted, but he knew the doctor was right. He quickly took Thunder to the livery, explained what he needed, and while the stable hands worked, he went to the general store and bought bread, cheese, and dried fruit that he could eat while riding. He refilled his canteen from the town pump, forcing himself to drink deeply, even though his stomach protested after days of short rations. True to his word, Dr. Mitchell appeared at the livery within 20 minutes, carrying 2 large saddle bags filled with medical supplies. He was younger than Russell had initially thought, probably in his early 40s, with a lean build that suggested he was no stranger to hard work. He had changed into riding clothes and carried a Winchester rifle, understanding that the Wyoming wilderness demanded a man be prepared for any threat. "My wife is furious with me," Dr. Mitchell said with a slight smile as he secured his bags to one of the fresh horses. "But she understands. Are you ready, Mr. Quade?" Russell, and yes, "Thank you, doctor. I cannot express what this means. Thank me when we save her life. Now let us ride." They left Columbus at a hard gallop, the fresh horses eager after their rest. Russell's body screamed in protest at returning to the saddle so soon, but he gritted his teeth and ignored it. Dr. Mitchell proved to be an excellent horseman, keeping pace without complaint as they raced across the plains toward the mountains. As they rode, the doctor asked more questions about Amelia's condition, about the timeline of her symptoms, about the cabin's conditions, and what resources Russell had available. Russell answered as best he could, grateful that talking gave him something to focus on besides his fear. "You care for her a great deal," Dr. Mitchell observed. It was not quite a question. Russell was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "I did not expect to. I chose the mountains because I wanted to be alone. But then she appeared and everything changed. I cannot explain it properly, doctor. I only know that if she dies, something essential in me will die with her." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Love often arrives when we least expect it, Russell, and it asks us to be braver than we ever thought possible. You rode 3 days straight to save her. That is not the action of a man who does not know his own heart." The word love hung in the air between them, and Russell turned it over in his mind as Thunder carried him up the first mountain trails. Was that what this was? This fierce protectiveness, this desperate need to keep her safe, this certainty that his life would be immeasurably diminished without her presence in it? He supposed it was. He loved Amelia Zimmerman, this brave young woman who had survived horrors that would have broken lesser people, who had laughed in his rough cabin as if it were a palace, who had looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and switch to fresh mounts they had brought from the livery. Dr. Mitchell had insisted on renting 4 horses total, allowing them to rotate the animals and maintain a pace that would have been impossible otherwise. It was expensive, but Russell had pelts stored in Columbus from years of trapping, and he would trade every single one if it meant saving Amelia. The night was clear, the stars brilliant overhead as they continued their desperate journey. Russell's eyes felt gritty with exhaustion, but he did not dare sleep beyond brief intervals. Every hour that passed was an hour Amelia was alone, fighting for her life. "Tell me about her, doctor," Mitchell said during one of their brief rest stops. "What is she like when she is well?" Russell found himself talking, the words coming easier in the darkness. He told the doctor about Amelia's courage, how she had survived alone in the wilderness for days before finding his cabin. About her kindness, the way she had insisted on helping with chores despite being his guest. About her smile, which lit up the dim cabin like sunshine breaking through clouds. "She sings sometimes," Russell said, surprised by the softness in his own voice, "while she works. Old songs her mother taught her. She has a beautiful voice. I would sit and listen while I cleaned my rifle or mended my gear, and I felt more content than I have in years." "Sounds like a remarkable woman," Dr. Mitchell said. "We will do everything in our power to save her, Russell. I give you my word." They pushed on through the second day, the mountains rising around them as they climbed higher into the Absaroka Range. The trails were treacherous, and they had to slow their pace considerably, but they still made better time than Russell's initial 3-day journey. The fresh horses and the doctor's determination to maintain momentum meant they were shaving precious hours off the return trip. Russell's mind was a constant whirl of scenarios. Would they arrive to find Amelia still breathing? Or would the cabin be silent, his chance to tell her how he felt lost forever? He forced such thoughts away, focusing instead on the trail ahead, on navigating the dangerous passes, on keeping both himself and Dr. Mitchell safe so they could reach her. On the afternoon of the second day since leaving Columbus, Russell began to recognize landmarks: the split pine tree that had been struck by lightning, the creek that ran silver over smooth stones, the outcropping of red rock that looked like a giant's face. They were close now, less than a mile from his cabin. "Almost there," he told Dr. Mitchell, urging his horse faster despite the animal's exhaustion. They burst into the small clearing around Russell's cabin in the late afternoon sun. Russell was off his horse before the animal had fully stopped, sprinting toward the door with Dr. Mitchell close behind, medical bags in hand. The cabin was dim inside, the fire having burned down to embers. Russell's eyes went immediately to the bed, and his heart nearly stopped. Amelia lay exactly as he had left her, buried beneath blankets, so still that for a terrible moment he thought they were too late. Then he saw her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths, and relief made him dizzy. Dr. Mitchell pushed past him and went directly to Amelia's side. He set down his bags and immediately began his examination, pressing fingers to her throat to check her pulse, lifting her eyelids to examine her pupils, running his hands over her forehead and neck. "The fever is extremely high," he said tersely. "Help me remove some of these blankets. We need to cool her body temperature before we do anything else." Russell moved to obey, gently pulling away the excess blankets until only a thin sheet covered her. Amelia whimpered at the movement, her head thrashing weakly from side to side. "Bring me cool water," Dr. Mitchell ordered. "As much as you can. And I need you to build up that fire. I will need to boil water for sterilizing instruments." Russell moved with purpose, grateful to have concrete tasks to perform. He filled every container he owned with water from the stream behind his cabin, got the fire roaring again, and set pots to boil while Dr. Mitchell continued his examination. "Talk to me, doctor," Russell said as he worked. "What are you finding?" Her pulse is rapid and weak. Breathing is shallow. The fever has persisted for too long, and her body is exhausted from fighting whatever infection has taken hold. He pressed gently on her abdomen, checking for signs of internal issues. No apparent injuries or infected wounds. "This appears to be some form of fever illness, possibly related to exposure or contaminated water during her time wandering after the wagon train attack. Dr. Mitchell opened his medical bag and began preparing medications. I am going to give her an injection of quinine to fight the fever and any potential infection. Then we will work on cooling her body temperature gradually. Too fast could send her into shock, but we need to bring it down. After that, it is a matter of keeping her hydrated and waiting to see if her body can recover with proper medical support. Russell watched as the doctor administered the injection. Then together they began the slow process of cooling Amelia's fever. They placed cloths soaked in cool water on her forehead, wrists, and ankles. Dr. Mitchell carefully managed her temperature, checking frequently to ensure they were not cooling her too rapidly. Hours passed. The sun set outside, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the fire's glow. Russell lit lanterns, maintaining steady light for the doctor to work by. Dr. Mitchell periodically administered small doses of medication, forced water between Amelia's lips a few drops at a time, and monitored her condition with the focused intensity of a man who understood exactly how close to death's door his patient stood. "Is she improving?" Russell asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and fear. Dr. Mitchell did not answer immediately, continuing his examination before finally saying, "Her fever has come down slightly. That is promising. The quinine is working, but she is very weak. The next several hours are critical. If she can hold on until morning, her chances improve significantly. What can I do? Keep those compresses cool and changed regularly. Talk to her if you wish. Sometimes patients in this state can hear familiar voices, and it can provide them something to hold on to, and rest when you can. You have been running on sheer willpower for days now. I will wake you if there is any change." Russell wanted to protest, to insist he would not sleep while Amelia's life hung in the balance, but his body had other ideas. The moment he sat down in his chair near the fire, exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. He tried to keep his eyes open, tried to stay alert, but within minutes he had fallen into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to find early morning light streaming through the cabin windows and Dr. Mitchell gently shaking his shoulder. Russell jerked awake, immediately looking toward the bed, fearing the worst. "She is stable," Dr. Mitchell said quickly, seeing the panic in Russell's eyes. "The fever broke about an hour ago. She is sleeping naturally now, not unconscious. I believe she is going to recover." Russell crossed to the bed in 3 long strides. Amelia's face was still pale, but the terrifying flush of fever was gone. When he pressed his hand to her forehead, her skin was cool, perhaps even slightly too cool after the days of burning heat. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. For a moment her blue eyes were unfocused, confused. Then they found Russell's face and widened with recognition and relief. "Russell," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "You came back." "Of course I came back," he said, taking her hand gently in his massive calloused one. "I promised I would. I thought I was dreaming. I kept dreaming you were far away and I could not reach you." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I was so frightened." Russell wiped the tear away with his thumb, his touch gentle despite the strength in his hands. "You are safe now. Dr. Mitchell came back with me from Columbus. He saved your life." Amelia's eyes shifted to the doctor, who stood discreetly by the fire to give them a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need to thank me yet, young lady," Dr. Mitchell said with a kind smile. "You have a long recovery ahead of you, but yes, I believe you will make a full recovery with proper rest and care." Over the following days, Russell barely left Amelia's side. Dr. Mitchell stayed for 3 days, monitoring her condition and ensuring the fever did not return. He taught Russell how to prepare simple broths and teas that would help Amelia regain her strength, how to watch for warning signs of relapse, and how to gradually increase her activity as she healed. During those long days of recovery, Russell and Amelia talked in ways they never had before. She told him about her fears during the fever, about the strange dreams she had experienced. He told her about his desperate ride to Columbus, about his terror that he would return to find her gone. "I realized something during that ride," Russell said one evening as he sat beside her bed, holding a cup of warm broth to her lips. "Something I should have told you before you fell ill." Amelia looked at him with those clear blue eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. "What is that?" "That I love you, Amelia Zimmerman. I know it has only been weeks since you arrived, and I know I am not good with words or civilized ways. I am just a rough mountain man who knows more about trapping beaver than talking to beautiful women. But you have brought light into my life that I did not even know was missing. And if you will have me, I would like you to stay here not as a guest, but as my wife." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Russell Quade, I have loved you since the moment you gave me your bed and insisted on sleeping on the floor despite being twice my size. I have loved you through every kind gesture, every awkward attempt at conversation, every time you looked at me like I was something precious. Of course I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Russell felt something tight and painful in his chest suddenly release, flooding him with warmth and joy. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss, mindful of her still fragile condition, but needing to seal this moment, this promise between them, when Dr. Mitchell prepared to leave and return to Columbus. Russell pressed a substantial payment into his hands along with his deepest gratitude. The doctor refused at first, saying that saving lives was his calling, not his business, but Russell insisted. "You gave me back my future," Russell said firmly. "That is worth more than any amount of money. Please accept this." Dr. Mitchell finally agreed, then surprised them both by saying, "When the young lady is fully recovered and you two decide to marry, send word to Columbus. My wife and I would be honored to attend the wedding." After the doctor left, Amelia's recovery progressed steadily. Within a week, she was able to sit up and move around the cabin. Within 2 weeks, she was helping with light chores, though Russell insisted she not overdo it. The color returned to her cheeks, the strength to her limbs, and the beautiful laugh he had missed so desperately echoed through the cabin once more. One evening about a month after her fever had broken, Russell came in from checking his trap lines to find Amelia standing at the cabin's single window, looking out at the sunset, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. She turned when she heard him enter, and the smile she gave him made his heart skip in his chest. She was wearing one of his old shirts tied at the waist over her dress, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, looking more beautiful than any woman had a right to be. "I have been thinking," she said as he crossed to join her at the window. "About what?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "About how strange life is. A few months ago I was trapped in Missouri, facing a future I did not want with a man I could not love. I thought my life was over before it had truly begun. Then the wagon train was attacked, and I thought I was going to die in these mountains. And instead I found you. I found home." Russell tightened his embrace, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling her words evoked. "These mountains tried to kill you, and I dragged you back from death's door by sheer stubbornness. I think that means you are stuck with me now." She laughed and turned in his arms to face him. "I cannot imagine anywhere else I would rather be stuck. So when do you want to get married, Mr. Quade? How about tomorrow?" he said with a rare smile. "Or as soon as we can get down to Columbus. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." "Then we had better start planning," Amelia said, rising on her toes to kiss him, "because I have no intention of waiting either." 3 weeks later, they rode down to Columbus together, Amelia riding the gentle mare Russell had traded for specifically for her use. The journey that had taken Russell 3 desperate days to complete took them 5 days of easy riding, stopping early each evening to camp and rest. Russell was amazed at how different the trail seemed with Amelia beside him. What had been a desperate race against death was now an adventure, a chance to show her the beauty of the wilderness he called home. They arrived in Columbus on a bright September morning in 1877, the town bustling with activity as merchants prepared for the coming winter, and ranchers brought in their final cattle drives before the snow arrived. Russell took Amelia first to the hotel, securing them separate rooms as was proper, then went to find Dr. Mitchell to let him know they had arrived. The doctor and his wife, a kind woman named Margaret who immediately took Amelia under her wing, helped them arrange a simple wedding ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Word spread quickly in the small community about the mountain man who had ridden 3 days straight to save a woman's life, and by the day of the wedding, half the town turned out to witness their union. Amelia wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Mitchell had helped her purchase from the general store, with wildflowers in her hair that Russell had picked that morning. Russell had cleaned up as best he could, trimming his beard and wearing the one set of good clothes he owned, though he still looked more like a wild mountain man than a proper groom. But when Amelia walked toward him down the church's short aisle, her eyes shining with love and her smile radiant, he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. The minister, an elderly man named Reverend Patterson who had seen countless couples through their vows, pronounced them husband and wife with a warmth that suggested he understood this was more than just a convenient arrangement. This was 2 souls who had found each other against impossible odds and chosen to bind their lives together. When Russell kissed his bride, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. Dr. Mitchell clapped him on the shoulder afterward, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction at seeing his patient not only recovered but radiant with happiness. They stayed in Columbus for another 3 days, with the townspeople insisting on throwing them a proper celebration. There was dancing and music, generous gifts from people who barely knew them but were moved by their story, and more food than Russell had seen in years. Amelia glowed with joy throughout it all, and Russell found himself relaxing in ways he never had around large groups of people, Amelia's presence at his side giving him confidence and comfort. But eventually, they both grew eager to return to the mountain cabin, to begin their life together in earnest. They purchased additional supplies, including materials to expand the cabin, more medical supplies at Dr. Mitchell's insistence, and fabric for Amelia to make proper curtains and other homey touches. They loaded everything onto a pack horse and began the journey back to the mountains as husband and wife. The cabin felt different when they returned. Russell had always thought of it as a shelter, a place to sleep and store his provisions and nothing more. But watching Amelia move through it, arranging their new purchases, hanging curtains in the windows, and humming as she worked, he realized it had become a home. That first night back, with the fire crackling and the mountain wind whistling outside, Russell and Amelia consummated their marriage with a tenderness that surprised them both. Russell had worried his size and rough nature might frighten her, but Amelia came to him without fear, with only love and desire in her eyes. They learned each other slowly, carefully, Russell's strong hands gentle on her still recovering body, Amelia's soft touch exploring the scars and muscles of the man who had saved her life and captured her heart. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed that Russell had once slept on the floor to give her, Amelia traced her fingers over his chest and said quietly, "I never knew life could be this good, this right." Russell pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Neither did I. But I intend to spend every day making sure you never regret choosing this life with me." "Impossible," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "This is exactly where I am meant to be." The first year of their marriage brought challenges as they adjusted to truly sharing their lives. The cabin expansion took several months, with Russell working during the warmer weather to add a proper bedroom, a larger cooking area, and a root cellar for storing provisions. Amelia proved remarkably adaptable to mountain life, learning to hunt small game, to preserve food for the winter, to tan hides and make clothing from the animals Russell trapped. When the first major snowstorm of winter trapped them in the cabin for a week straight, they discovered that close quarters only made them appreciate each other more. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams for the future. Russell taught Amelia to read the signs of weather in the sky, to identify animal tracks in the snow. Amelia taught Russell to read from the few books she had managed to save from the wagon train attack, opening up worlds of literature and poetry he had never experienced. Spring brought a new discovery. Amelia realized she was pregnant in late April, and the joy on her face when she told Russell made him feel like his heart might burst from his chest. He became even more protective than before, insisting she rest frequently and taking over the heavier chores entirely. "Russell, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one afternoon when he had refused to let her carry water from the stream. "You nearly died last year," he reminded her, his voice gruff with emotion. "I will not take any chances with your health or our child's." She softened, seeing the real fear behind his overprotectiveness. "I am strong now, stronger than I have ever been, but I appreciate that you care so much." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "This baby is lucky to have you as a father." Their son was born in December of 1878, during a brief break in the winter storms. Russell had insisted they go to Columbus well before Amelia's due date, unwilling to risk her or the baby's life by being too far from medical help. Dr. Mitchell attended the birth, and when he placed the squalling infant in Russell's arms, the mountain man who had faced down grizzly bears and survived blizzards found himself weeping with joy and fear at the fragility of the tiny life he held. They named him Thomas, after Russell's father. He had his mother's blonde hair and his father's gray eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he had both his parents completely under his spell. Returning to the cabin with a newborn brought new challenges, but also profound joy. Russell had never imagined himself as a father, had never thought he would have the opportunity to raise a child and pass on everything his own father had taught him. Watching Amelia nurse their son, seeing her smile down at the baby with such pure love, Russell fell in love with her all over again. The years passed in a rhythm dictated by the seasons. Winters spent mostly in the cabin, keeping warm and telling stories while the snow piled high outside. Springs dedicated to trapping and hunting, restocking their supplies and making trips to Columbus to trade pelts for necessities. Summers spent tending the small garden Amelia had established, teaching Thomas to walk, and then to run through the mountain meadows. Autumns preparing for winter, preserving food, and enjoying the spectacular display of colors as the aspen leaves turned gold. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who idolized his father and adored his mother. By the time he was 3, he was following Russell everywhere, wanting to learn everything about surviving in the mountains. Amelia would watch them together, her heart full as she saw Russell's patience with their son. The way he explained things in simple terms Thomas could understand, the pride in his eyes when Thomas accomplished even small tasks. In the spring of 1882, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body stronger and more prepared for the demands of carrying a child. Their daughter was born in October of that year, and they named her Sarah, after Amelia's mother. Sarah was different from Thomas from the start. Where he was bold and adventurous, she was thoughtful and careful. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes, and she seemed to see everything with an intensity that sometimes surprised her parents. Thomas, now nearly 4 years old, appointed himself her protector, insisting on being near her crib to make sure she was safe. More years passed, and the Quade family became something of a legend in the region. Trappers and traders who ventured into the Absaroka Mountains would occasionally stumble upon their cabin and be welcomed with generous hospitality. Stories spread about the mountain man who had ridden 3 days straight to save his dying wife, about the strong family they had built in the wilderness. Dr. Mitchell and his wife became regular visitors, making the journey up to the cabin every summer to check on the family and enjoy the beauty of the mountains. Margaret Mitchell and Amelia formed a close friendship, despite the distance between them, corresponding through letters whenever Russell made trips to Columbus. When Thomas was 8 and Sarah was 4, Russell built them a small schoolhouse addition to the cabin, determined that his children would have education along with wilderness skills. Amelia taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic, using the small collection of books they had accumulated over the years. Russell taught them tracking, hunting, how to read the weather and the land, skills that would keep them alive in the unforgiving mountain environment. One evening in the summer of 1886, after the children had been put to bed, Russell and Amelia sat outside their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Amelia leaned against her husband's solid frame, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, both of them content in the comfortable silence of people who know each other completely. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going on to Oregon, living such an isolated life?" Amelia turned to look at him, surprised. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? You could have had an easier life. A house in town, neighbors, society. Instead, you are stuck on a mountain with a man who still does not know the right words most of the time." "Russell Quade," Amelia said firmly, taking his face in her hands. "You rode 3 days straight through dangerous territory to save my life when you could have just let me die. You have spent every day since showing me what real love looks like through your actions, even if you think you do not have the right words. You have given me 2 beautiful children, a home filled with love, and a life rich with purpose and meaning. I have everything I could ever want right here." Russell pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you, Amelia, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I know," she whispered, "and I love you just as much. We built something extraordinary here, Russell. Against all odds, we found each other and created this beautiful life. That is not something to regret. That is something to celebrate every single day." The years continued to pass, bringing changes but never diminishing the love that formed the foundation of the Quade family. Thomas grew into a young man who combined his father's strength and wilderness skills with his mother's intelligence and empathy. He began making trips to Columbus on his own, courting a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, whom he eventually married in 1894. Sarah, meanwhile, showed a gift for healing and medicine that reminded everyone of Dr. Mitchell. When she was 16, she asked to spend a year in Columbus learning from the doctor, and though it broke Russell's heart to be separated from his daughter, he and Amelia agreed it was important to support her dreams. She eventually became a nurse, splitting her time between helping in Columbus and providing medical care to the scattered families and trappers in the mountain regions. Russell and Amelia's cabin became a gathering place for their growing family. Thomas and Elizabeth built their own home on land nearby, and their children, 3 boys who terrorized the mountains with their boundless energy, were constant visitors to their grandparents' cabin. Sarah, when she was not working, would return home to the place she still considered her true sanctuary. Through it all, Russell and Amelia remained devoted to each other with an intensity that never faded. Even as their hair turned gray and their bodies showed the wear of hard mountain living, they would still steal moments alone, still look at each other with the same love that had bloomed during those early days when Russell had fought so desperately to save her life. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1907, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Thomas had brought his family. Sarah had come up from Columbus, where she was working at the clinic doctor. Mitchell had expanded, and even some of their friends from town had made the journey to honor the couple whose love story had become legend. As the sun set that evening and the party moved inside the now much expanded cabin, Russell found Amelia standing at the original window, the one where she had stood so many years ago when they had decided to get married. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, moving to stand behind her and wrap his arms around her waist as he had done countless times before. "About the day I stumbled up to this cabin, half dead from exhaustion and fear," she said softly. "About how I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left to hope for. And then you opened that door, and everything changed." "I was so afraid," Russell admitted. "When you got sick when I rode to Columbus, I was more terrified than I had ever been. The thought of losing you before I had even told you how I felt was unbearable." "But you did not lose me," Amelia said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saved me, Russell. In every possible way you saved me. And then we saved each other every day since." Russell looked into the blue eyes that had captured his heart 3 decades ago and saw the same love, the same certainty that had drawn them together. "Best decision I ever made, riding down that mountain for help." "Second best," Amelia corrected with a smile. "Oh, what was the first?" "Asking me to stay. Asking me to be your wife. That was when you did not just save my life, but gave me a life worth living." They kissed then, aware of their family celebrating around them but lost in their own world for just a moment. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was standing nearby with tears in her eyes. "You two are the reason I still believe in true love," she said. "The way you look at each other, even after all these years, it gives me hope that I will find something that real someday." "You will," Amelia assured her daughter. "Love finds you when you least expect it and most need it. I know that better than anyone." The celebration continued late into the night, filled with laughter and stories and music. Russell's grandchildren begged him to tell them again about the time he rode 3 days straight to save Grandma's life. A story they never tired of hearing, despite knowing every detail by heart. Russell obliged, watching Amelia's face as he recounted those desperate days, seeing the emotion there even after so many years. When he finished, his oldest grandson, a boy of 10 named Robert, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Were you scared, Grandpa?" "Terrified," Russell admitted honestly. "More scared than I have ever been before or since. But you did it anyway. Because some things are worth being afraid for. Some people are worth risking everything to save." Robert nodded solemnly, as if understanding despite his young age that he was being taught an important lesson about love and sacrifice. Eventually, the party wound down. Thomas and his family headed back to their own home. Sarah returned to the room she still kept in the cabin, and the visitors from town either headed down the mountain or bedded down in the barn Russell had built years ago for such occasions. Alone in their bedroom, the room Russell had added to the cabin during that first year of marriage, Russell and Amelia prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of 3 decades together. 30 years, Amelia mused as she brushed out her long hair, now more silver than blonde. Seems impossible that so much time has passed. Best 30 years of my life, Russell said, already in bed and watching her with the same appreciation he had felt as a younger man. Amelia set down her brush and joined him, snuggling into his side with her head on his chest, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. Mine too, even the hard parts, even the times we struggled. It was all worth it to have this, to have you. I never thought I would have any of this, Russell said quietly, his arms tightening around her. A wife I love, children and grandchildren, a real home instead of just a shelter. You gave me all of that, Amelia. We gave it to each other, she corrected sleepily. That is how love works, Russell. It is not one person saving the other. It is 2 people choosing each other every day and building something beautiful together. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in a love that had survived illness and hardship, isolation and difficulty, and emerged stronger for it. Outside, the Wyoming mountains stood eternal under the stars, keeping watch over the cabin where a mountain man and the woman he had saved had built a life beyond anything either had dared to dream. Years continued to add themselves to the story of Russell and Amelia Quade. Russell's hair turned fully white, and his movements slowed somewhat, but he remained strong and capable well into his 70s. Amelia developed a slight stoop from years of hard work, but her mind stayed sharp, and her laugh remained as bright as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, creating a small community of quads scattered through the mountain region. Thomas took over much of the heavier work of trapping and hunting, ensuring his aging parents wanted for nothing. Sarah became known throughout the territory as a skilled healer, her reputation growing until she was in demand across Wyoming. But through it all, Russell and Amelia remained each other's constant. They still took walks together through the mountain meadows when weather permitted. They still sat by the fire on winter evenings, her reading aloud while he worked on small carving projects. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and love in familiar touches. One spring morning in 1912, when Russell was nearly 70 and Amelia 62, they stood together outside their cabin watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. The world was changing rapidly in the valleys below. Automobiles were beginning to appear in Columbus. Electricity was coming to some of the larger towns, and the wild frontier that had defined their younger years was slowly being tamed. But here, in these mountains, time moved differently. The cabin still stood solid and warm. The stream still ran clear and cold. The wildlife still followed their ancient patterns, and Russell and Amelia still loved each other with the same fierce devotion that had been forged in those early desperate days. No regrets. Russell asked the question that had become something of a ritual between them over the years. Not a single one, Amelia replied, as she always did. You. Only that I wish I could live it all over again. Every moment with you has been precious. Amelia smiled and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. Then we will just have to make sure every moment we have left counts. And they did. through the remaining years given to them. Russell and Amelia Quade lived with intention and joy, surrounded by the family their love had created, in the mountains that had witnessed their beginning. They had built something extraordinary together, a love story that would be passed down through generations, a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other against all odds and held on through whatever life brought them. The cabin still stands today, maintained by their descendants who recognize it as the birthplace of their family's legacy. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the Absaroka Mountains, you can almost hear the echo of laughter, the sound of love that survived fever and fear to create something eternal. Their story, the tale of a mountain man who rode 3 days straight to save a dying woman and found his entire world in the process, became the stuff of legend in Wyoming. But for Russell and Amelia, it was simply their life, their love, their truth. And they lived it fully, gratefully, together until the very end, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single desperate act of courage and a heart brave enough to love without reservation. In their final years, Russell and Amelia would sit on the porch Thomas had built for them, watching their great-grandchildren play in the meadow where once Russell had taught Thomas to track rabbits. They would hold hands and share quiet smiles, communicating in the wordless language that long-married couples develop, needing no speech to express the depth of feeling between them. When Russell finally passed in the winter of 1915, Amelia held his hand and whispered the same words she had spoken when he had saved her life all those years ago. "You came back for me. You always came back for me." Amelia followed him less than a year later, her heart simply unable to beat without his answering rhythm nearby. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their cabin, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates, and one line chosen by their children: "True love, faithfully lived." But their story did not end there. It lived on in the children they raised, in the values they instilled, in the proof they provided that love could flourish even in the harshest environments if tended with care and devotion. It lived on in the cabin that had sheltered them, in the mountains that had witnessed their journey, in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale and dared to hope for such love themselves. The mountain man who rode 3 days to save a dying woman had found something more valuable than all the gold in the Western Territories. He had found home, family, purpose, and a love that transcended death itself. And the young woman who had stumbled to his door, broken and afraid, had found safety, strength, and a partner who would move mountains for her, literally and figuratively, until his final breath. Together, they had proven that happy endings were not just the stuff of fairy tales, but were possible for anyone brave enough to fight for them. Their love story became a beacon, a reminder that even in the wildest, harshest places, even in the face of impossible odds, love could not only survive but thrive, creating ripples that would extend far beyond their own lifetimes. And so the legend lived on, passed down through generations, embellished perhaps in some details, but true in all the ways that mattered. True in the courage it took to ride 3 days straight through dangerous territory for someone you had only known for weeks. True in the choice to build a life together in isolation rather than seeking easier paths. True in the commitment to love each other through sickness and health, hardship and joy, for better or worse, until death finally parted them. The story of Russell and Amelia Quade became more than just a tale told around campfires and dinner tables. It became proof that the best love stories were not the easiest ones, but the ones where people chose each other actively, deliberately, every single day. Where they fought for each other when it would have been simpler to walk away. where they built something lasting not because it was convenient, but because they could not imagine any other life. In the end, that desperate ride through the Wyoming wilderness in 1877 had not just saved Amelia's life. It had created a legacy, a family, a love story that would endure long after the cabin crumbled and the mountains wore down to dust. It had proven that one moment of courage, one desperate act of love, could change everything. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift Russell and Amelia gave to the world. Not just their love for each other, but the example they set. The proof that it was worth it, that love was worth fighting for, worth riding 3 days straight for, worth building an entire life around. They showed that the greatest adventure was not conquering wilderness or striking gold, but finding someone worth coming home to, someone worth saving, someone worth spending every remaining moment with. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry that lesson forward, making their own choices about love and life with the example of Russell and Amelia lighting their way. Some would stay in the mountains, keeping the traditions alive. Others would venture into the changing world beyond, carrying their family's story with them like a talisman. But all of them would know, deep in their bones, what real love looked like. They had seen it in the way their grandparents looked at each other after 50 years together. They had heard it in the stories told and retold about that desperate ride, that fevered recovery, that decision to build a life together against all odds. The mountain man and his bride had shown them all what was possible when two hearts beat in perfect rhythm, when two souls recognized each other across impossible distances and circumstances, when two people decided that together they were stronger than anything the world could throw at them. And in that, Russell and Amelia Quade achieved a kind of immortality that had nothing to do with fame or fortune, and everything to do with love faithfully given and gratefully received, day after day, year after year, until the mountains themselves seemed to echo with the permanence of their devotion. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and separation. But in the larger sense, it never ended at all. It simply transformed, becoming part of the landscape itself, woven into the fabric of the mountains that had brought them together. Every spring when wildflowers bloomed on that hillside where they rested, every sunset that painted the peaks in colors too beautiful for words, every wind that whispered through the pine trees around their cabin, all carried the essence of their love forward into eternity. For love like theirs does not simply end. It transforms, it endures, it becomes part of something larger. And anyone who stood on that mountain, who looked out over the vast Wyoming wilderness that had witnessed their journey, could feel it still. The echo of a desperate ride undertaken in the name of love. The memory of a woman who survived against all odds. The legacy of two hearts that beat as one until they finally fell silent together, secure in the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved completely, and left the world immeasurably richer for their presence in it. That was the true end of their story, and yet also just the beginning, as all the best love stories are. Never truly over, always living on in the hearts and memories of those who came after, inspiring new generations to believe in love, to fight for it, to ride 3 days straight through impossible terrain, if that is what it takes to save the person who makes life worth living. Russell and Amelia had done that. They had shown the way. And their love, born in desperation and nurtured through dedication, remained as eternal and unchanging as the mountains themselves, a testament to the power of two people who choose each other and never look back, who build something beautiful together and protect it fiercely, until the very end. Their story was complete, their love fulfilled, their legacy assured. and that was more than most people could ever hope to achieve in a dozen lifetimes. They had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for than that?